Hey everyone, today we're going to begin our unit about taxes. Now, taxes are definitely a double-edged sword. Sometimes they do actually some good, and other times they do some damage. Paying taxes really has been a issue for quite a long period of time. If you remember, the Magna Carta and the Petition of Right signed by King Charles I both indicate that the king at the time of England could not tax without the approval of Parliament. Why would it be such a big deal for the government to tax as it needed? Well, taxes have always been an issue in a society like ours. Think about it. We work hard for our money. In many ways, we feel like we deserve it. Yet, just like doing chores, paying taxes is necessary. And it's necessary because it allows the government to perform its basic functions. These include the protection of property, national defense, and public services. So we'll talk about each of these when it comes to why taxes are necessary and how they help uh, the government to do its basic functions. One of the first functions of the government is to protect property, and the government sure could make laws that make stealing a crime, but what if it can't enforce this? How can the government prevent theft if it does not have the means to do so? And as we learned back then, when the government can't do one of its basic functions, we're going to tend to drift towards anarchy. By implementing taxes, the government can pay for someone like the police to enforce the law to make sure that no one is stealing and thus prevent anarchy. It also can give the police the proper equipment because today, as a society, we are certainly see the value in supporting the government to do its job. When it comes to protecting its citizens, it's hard, again, to do so without financial backing. Without taxes, our military would have the most advanced jets in the world, the best trained soldiers, or the best tools to keep them safe. By paying taxes, we actually, again, better our lives in this case. Beforehand, we paid our military. Before we had a professional military, we simply had militias. And as you may or may not have known, those militias were poorly trained and really had no chance against the professionally paid and equipped army of the United Kingdom during the War for Independence in 1776. Even today, it's funny, I just saw a documentary of Russian fighter aircraft. And while it was a little bit old, once the Soviet Union collapsed and they had their economy weakened and they could no longer collect taxes, they took to training in those fighting military craft by offering joyrides, and that allowed them training. But they didn't have taxes, and they didn't have the joyride seeking individuals. They wouldn't have had any way to train for their national defense. So, taxes, the need for taxes isn't just limited to the United States by any means. Lastly, without taxes, many of the public services that the government provides that help benefit a society wouldn't exist either. Your education would not exist. The roads you drive on daily would not exist. The airports that would have had to been funded privately, and the water that you receive when you turn your sink would have to come from somewhere that you developed yourself. So even in terms of developing infrastructure, taxes are necessary because it simply takes money to do so. As we watched a couple of videos ago, the government is the country's largest employer in the United States, and currently 30% of the people in this country are employed by the government. That means taxes are roughly employing roughly 90 million people, and this is why, to some degree, cutting programs is so detrimental because people lose their jobs and therefore aren't able to pay into the economy and better someone else's job. In defense, some would say that we live in a free market economy and that a free market economy does not allow for government programs or taxes. But remember the advantages of a free market economy? People are free to develop their ideas and pursue them without any hindrances, but there's disadvantages too. You and I would not have nearly as many things available to us, and the individuals like the young, the poor, handicapped, old, pregnant, and disabled would have to rely on someone else. Much of our tax money goes to helping these individuals who would be left out in the streets uh, if they didn't have anyone else. There's no question with taxes that the more you have in terms of government services, the more you will pay in taxes. But that isn't always necessarily the case. So sometimes, and we'll discover this a little bit more, just because you pay more in taxes does not mean you're necessarily going to get more. And some of that is a result of other problems in the budget, which we'll talk about. But first, let's just talk about this idea: the more you have, the more you pay. Well, let's consider Paris. If you know anything about it, you probably know some pretty cool things, and I know some of you just got back, so you probably saw some cool things there. Imagine you want to get around that city. Well, as your options go, they include subway, car, uh, and on the subway, you don't have to pay anything for it. Actually, if you miss it, you just get on the next one in 90 seconds. Don't feel like taking a subway? That's fine. Take one of the free public bicycles or enjoy a stroll through the city, and you'll see immaculate streets and buildings and plenty of public parks. Let's just so happen let's just imagine, however, some escargot doesn't agree with you. Go to one of the many hospitals, and you're not going to have to pay a dime. Sounds pretty good, huh? What you won't see, however, is that the French give about 70% of their pay away in taxes. In other words, like I said, the more government services you have, the more you're going to have to pay in taxes. When you pay more taxes for government services, you're also creating a bigger government, and therein lies the question. How much government, again, do we really want in our lives? Do we want the government to run every aspect of public service? If we do, and there's nothing wrong with saying that you do, just like there's nothing wrong saying that you don't, but if you do, then we should have no problem forking over their money. But like I said, if we don't, then we might have to ask, how much money does the government need to do what we want it to do? When it comes to the United States, Americans traditionally do not like taxes for numerous reasons. The first is that we value popular sovereignty and limited government. We tell the government how much we want to give because we run the country, not the other way around. Secondly, when you have a big government, you also have a powerful government. How much power do we really want to give the government? Thirdly, does the government have the right to take money that they did not work for services that you did not ask for? What if some people ask for a service but you don't? Should you have to pay for it? Just a question. Thirdly, how does the government institute a fair tax policy? And this is definitely a question that is at debate at every election cycle. Where what's a tax policy where everyone can benefit and not be harmed for taxes? For example, should everyone have to pay the same amount? Okay, well that sounds fair. Let's consider that. And this would be something called the fair tax, where everyone pays the same amount of percentage. Well, this is called the fair tax by some people. Actually, Ted Cruz is a proponent of the fair tax. So if you're looking at election results, this would be something that you would want to look at. This is where every person pays pretty much the same percentage, or they pay the same amount of money. So let's take a look at an example and see if it amounts to its name. So let's say each person in America owes $7,000 a year to the government. Well, if you only make $21,000, that means the government is taking about 33% of your income. However, if you make $100,000 a year, that would mean the government is only taking 7%. This would mean that the poor would have a hard time getting ahead, while the rich would only have an easier time. Okay, so this is what we would call a regressive tax. A regressive tax plan is something that is a little bit harder on those in poverty than it is on middle class and um, in wealth or in prosperity. So there are some parts of it that aren't fair. It's not fair that someone who is making less gets taxed more um, and has a hard time paying the bill. Okay, well, let's say everyone gets taxed the same percentage. Let's say the government taxes everyone 6% of their income, and this is also part of a fair tax plan. A person making $100,000 a year would give the government $6,000, but a person making $200,000 a year would give $12,000. Now, at first glance, this may seem pretty fair. Everyone is paying the same amount, and everyone's feeling the same amount of pain on giving up the same percentage of their income. However, is it fair? Is it fair that the person making 200,000 has to pay double simply because they worked for their money and were a little bit more successful? Were they being punished for their success? Secondly, they're paying double for the same service, correct? And this would be more of if we had an income tax plan where you pay more based off what you make. Um, that would be something called a progressive tax plan. So income taxes where you pay your tax rate depends on what your income is more of a progressive plan, and someone comes out of the progressive era. Actually, it does. But really, the difference is between the regressive and progressive taxes. The progressive tax taxes people that are a little bit more on the prosperous side, and the regressive tax plans tax people that have a little bit harder time earning money. So, coming up with a tax system that's even fair is pretty difficult, and that's the other reason that taxes are really controversial in this country. It's not an easy thing in America. And in a society built around due process, popular sovereignty, and limited government, taxes are never going to be an easy thing to figure out. Yet they are necessary, and that is something that is not up for debate.